The Golden Hour Birth Podcast, a podcast about real birth stories and creating connections through our shared experiences.
Childbirth isn't just about the child. It's about the person who gave birth, their lives, their wisdom, and their empowerment.
We're Liz
and Natalie,
the Golden Hour Birth Podcast, and we're here to laugh with you,
cry with you,
and hold space for you. Welcome, Golden Hour Birth Podcast. I am your co-host, Liz.
And I'm your co-host, Natalie. Thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you guys for having me. I'm really grateful to be here.
Yeah, us too. So if you want to go ahead and just tell us a little bit about you and your family, we'd love to hear.
Yes, I'm about 30 years old. I am a mental health therapist based outside the Seattle area. I'm specifically interested in trauma, but I am a baby therapist. I've only been practicing about 2 years, so I have a long ways to go. My husband works in tech, and we have a 2-year-old daughter and a small dog. And then I grew up in the Midwest, and we went to college in St. Louis. That's where we met.
If you want to go ahead and tell us, like when you guys decided to start a family or getting pregnant and what pregnancy was like.
Yeah. So I think when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about, it's hard because there's a lot of like heaviness to my story and then also my birth story. And so, I'm a counselor, so I use some counselor language sometimes, but I think some of the language I might use is a little bit, well, there's just like a weight to it. But something that I wanted to share before I like talk about what went into getting pregnant that I feel like is really important is, just my thoughts on like having a family. And that really stemmed from my family of origin, which was pretty dysfunctional and pretty like abusive. And so it made the journey to becoming a mom really complicated, I think, emotionally, physically, everything. Just a little bit of background before we talked about getting pregnant. So my parents were both like pretty abusive and had really strong like narcissistic traits. And I feel like that's a very popular word on TikTok now, but I do mean it in like the truest sense of the word. And basically both of my parents were very like invasive people and like intrusive people. And you weren't allowed to, like, there wasn't such thing as being able to have a boundary with them or have your own voice. Like, you had to be exactly how they wanted you to be. And there was very little feeling that you, what's the word I'm looking for? That you owned your own self, that like you owned your own body and your own emotions and your own thoughts and opinions. And so I kind of grew up learning that intimacy is, and like relationships and being close to people is like violating and results in almost this like death to yourself. And so there's like a relationship that has to being pregnant, as you can imagine, and being a mom. And there are a lot of ways that showed up, like in how my birth went and how postpartum and pregnancy went. Mm-hmm. But in particular, image was like really, really focused on in my family. And in particular, being like a small body size, which is ironic because I'm almost 6 feet tall. But like being very in shape, and I was an athlete for a long time. I'm a college athlete. But it was just weight was hyper fixated on, and my mom specifically was very like cruel about my body and very just like critical, incessantly critical about it. And kind of just saying like, if you are fat, like nobody's gonna love you, basically like pretty directly. And so there were just all these things, this perfect storm that was created by my family of origin that led to a really difficult setup that I was stepping into when I thought about, starting a family. So I don't know if that made sense. if I'm,
Yeah.
Mhm. um, yeah,
Talk.
it's pretty heavy. Um, yeah, I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh yeah. So the biggest thing that I think it just let me feel was really powerless over my own body.
Mhm.
Um, Now you probably understand why I'm interested in trauma as a therapist, but it also led me to feel like really small and like I lose my voice when I get in stressful situations because with my parents, with my mom especially, like there was no way out. You just had to sit and like wait for it to be over. Yeah, so understandably, I never had a super strong desire to have children. It was never like this super passionate thing. I think I always felt like I was kind of a stranger to kids too. I never really knew what to do with them, and it's probably because I wasn't really much of a kid myself. But then, when I was in college, I kind of had a crisis, and I started seeing a counselor, and kind of a whole new world opened up for me, that like things could be different and I could understand what was going on inside my body. And I felt empowered to like make changes in my life. And I met my husband in college. And I think just some hope blossoms, I guess, that maybe I could have a family and like maybe I could be a mom someday. And so, I did counseling on and off for several years. And when I started my master's program for counseling, I don't know how long it's been now. And I did my internship. I think my faith in my own voice and my own intuition as somebody who could care for other people really, really grew a lot. And I thought, oh, maybe I have the capacity to be a good mom. So there was always this fear, like, am I just going to be just like the environment that I came out of? Am I going to turn into people that I'm really afraid of, and that caused me a lot of pain. So, um, yeah. So towards the end of my master's program, we kind of started talking about, okay, when do we want to start a family? Kind of a long road to licensure. And so, I think this is where we maybe took a step too hurriedly, and I wasn't really listening to like my own intuition. But we were kind of talking, okay, maybe now after I graduate, is a good time. And so I plan when I get anxious. And so I kind of just like jumped into that plan. Um, Even though I think a part of me was kind of like numb to that and like didn't feel, ready. And I think part of it too is I thought it would take a little while to get pregnant. Uh, and that did not happen. We got pregnant the first month that we tried. And going into this, I had done natural family planning, the Creighton model, which is like tracking your cervical mucus for some years. And so I had like pretty good awareness of when I was ovulating and stuff. Yeah, so we were surprised. Um, yeah, when we got pregnant. And I remember this feeling of like dread, kind of, and this feeling of like I should be happy about this, but I'm not. Um, and then the shame of like, oh yeah, am I just turning into, my mom or turning into my parents? And then 2 weeks later, the COVID happened and the COVID quarantines were announced. Um, so yeah, there's a lot more info there, but that's kind of, yeah, the journey to me being pregnant, which I think there's some sadness that it's not a happier story, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure the COVID added a layer onto it with like not being really able to like see anyone and celebrate with anyone.
yeah, I think not having some of that joy that would have been expressed to me by other people was definitely part of it, and like feeling alone. I do remember though, like other people would say congratulations, and it would be hard to receive it because I didn't feel happy.
Yeah.
It felt like, yeah, I'm not happy about this. But I feel like I should be, so it was just this very, I don't know, it was just a battle, like the whole pregnancy. It was this very like fragmented experience, part of me like so wanting to be a good mom and like changing these generational patterns. And then another part of me like screaming to get out of it almost. And it was just a very confusing experience, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't great experience. So
Yeah.
Hard when
yeah,
emotions aren't what you expected or what you want them to be, or
yeah. Yeah. And then it's hard to not feel, shame to compound all that of like, what does this say about who I am? What does this say about how I'm going to be a mom?
Yeah.
I never had that. I fell in love with my baby while they were in my womb. I never experienced any of that. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
My partner was just on a few weeks ago, and when I shared the news of like our second pregnancy, it was like met with shock. And so I found myself like kind of like battling him, like, why aren't you more excited? Things like that. And so I can kind of tell like where you're feeling to
yeah.
how he was feeling. Like I can see it. And um yeah, I can understand what you mean when you're saying
Yeah.
these things.
I think part of me, honestly, it felt like when I found I was pregnant, it felt like part of me kind of crawled into a cave. Um, and then I didn't come out for a really long time. And I think that was compounded by what ended up happening at my birth and afterwards and whatnot.
How did your pregnancy progress from there?
Yeah, so I think, it's kind of hard to talk about. Like, I'm on here because a lot of this is very difficult time. So probably if I had like a great experience, I wouldn't be motivated to like reach out to a podcast. But, so I think I want to acknowledge that, there were good things about my pregnancy and bad, like, and I'm more focusing on some of the things that were just really difficult. But it's hard because on the whole, it looked like my pregnancy was really good and healthy, like at the big picture. Like it was healthy, it was boring, it was uneventful, in terms of all the scans and everything was pretty routine. And, but like if you looked more closely, it was really, really difficult for me physically and emotionally. So it was kind of this theme of like nothing was severe enough to warrant immediate treatment, none of my symptoms, and yet they were strong enough that it was like debilitating to my daily life. And like what do you call it, like more moderate treatments didn't really work. So I had really severe nausea for like 6 months. It was pretty much 6 full months. It wasn't until the beginning of the third trimester that it went away. And everyone kept saying, oh, it'll go away at 12 weeks. And I waited and waited. And like every week, it just never got better. And I tried like all the basic shit, the like bracelets and the ginger, and like none of it did anything. It was just so hard. Like, and I never had any cravings. It was just like extreme food aversions. I think I basically ate like rice check cereal and milk. Like that's all I ate for the first like 3 or 4 months. It was terrible. And so like I don't eat rice checks ever anymore. But I think I only threw up like 3 times. But it was really hard because going into it, I have a really strong fear of throwing up. And so it was just terrible being in this state of like almost throwing up and nothing really helping. And I did end up finding the Unison B12 did help, but my doctor never told me about that. I basically found out about that like online. And this there's this big theme of like my doctor's care providers really sucking. That will be apparent. But so I felt really on my own and really kind of like alone, that things are really different than what the guides were telling me I should be feeling. And then on top of that, I gained like a lot of weight. And so I think I had gained like 15 pounds in the first month or two. And so all the apps were like, oh, you should have gained like, 2 pounds, or your jeans will be a little tight. I was like, I had to buy all new pants like a week ago. I don't know what you're talking about. So it was just tough. And then psychologically, I was having a really hard time with it. I think I just felt like that, theme of like violation or intrusion from my family was playing out. Like it was really unsettling to have this like being inside of me. And, you can't take any space from them. Like there is no boundary between you guys. And so I think it was just really triggering, like from a trauma standpoint, in a way that I was not expecting, and in a way that caused me to kind of shut down. Because when I'm anxious about something, but I feel like I'm capable of, attacking it, I get really planful and do a lot of research, and I become an expert in it. And I was like completely just like shut down. And it did not help that the whole world was shut down. So I'm sure that also like compounded everything, that I couldn't go anywhere other than my bed anyways. But I remember like I remember being like really dizzy too. And I tried to take my dog for a walk. I don't know, I think at month like 3, just around the block. Cause I was so sick. I was in bed all day, and my husband had to take over kind of like everything. And I got like, I don't know, 50 feet. And I was like, I feel like I'm going to pass out right now. So my husband had to like walk down the stairs of our apartment, like out, and like walk with me back to and I just felt so helpless. I went from being like a college athlete to all of a sudden feeling completely like helpless in my own body. And it's like, how could I not be pretty triggered by that? So, yeah, things ended up getting better, like I said, around the 3rd trimester. And I started going on some more walks and stuff. But, like I said, COVID happened. And so literally everything was shut down. Luckily, we lived by this big outdoor trail. And so I was able to go for walks out there. But like there were no in-person resources available at all. We were living in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment. So, it's like by the time I felt well enough to exercise, it was already like 2 months till the baby was going to come. So like, I'm sure there would have been a point, but I kind of felt like, what's the point? And then at that time, actually, I was also finishing my master's degree. So I graduated in June. So I was still finishing all my assignments and doing my finals, and then trying to apply for licensure. And like, I sat for my licensure exam. And all that stuff. So, yeah, it wasn't like a great time. And probably the last thing is our hospital had like temporarily paused their pregnancy classes. I think when like COVID was first announced, I remember like going online to look at what the classes were that were available. And they had like temporarily paused them. I imagine they were trying to like set up an infrastructure for doing it online or something. And I think it was a while before they resumed them. Because I remember telling my OB, who was sucky and completely unhelpful, but I remember telling him that, hey, what birth class would you recommend? Because your guys' isn't going right now. And he recommended this one nearby me that ended up being really unhelpful. It went over like super high level, didn't really go over the risks of any of the modes of delivery, didn't even cover instrumental deliveries. Like it basically didn't cover anything that happened during my birth. So, yeah, there was just like a complete, void of resources being pregnant in COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm sure that's something you guys have like heard talking to other people.
Yeah. We were both pregnant COVID too, but I for my second. So Yeah. I couldn't imagine not being in the impulse class. That sounds really tough.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did my COVID classes or my birth classes in like 2021 because I had my son in April and they were all online. And then all
Yeah.
my meetings with my doula were all online. And then we had one in-person class.
Yeah.
Just so she could like show us like labor, birth positions. That was really it. So I get where it coming from.
Yeah. And, you know, Seattle's pretty like, it's more on the liberal side. So I think our COVID, you know, responses or quarantines are probably more strict than other places, especially like Missouri. And so that probably played a part in that too. Which I, you know, I'm grateful for is neither good nor bad. But yeah, so I did, you know, on one hand, um, there's a part of me that feels guilt for not doing more. And like if I had done more while I was pregnant and prepared more, maybe I could have avoided what happened to me. Like it's my fault. And at the same time, you know, when I really like go through it, I didn't have any friends who were pregnant or had ever had a child. And so I also didn't have social media. So I was kind of going off word of mouth and recommendations, you know, online for the birthing hospital that I chose, which was highly, highly recommended. Now I have Facebook, but it's like the main place everyone around me recommends. And the doctor I chose, he's like highly rated. He's like very in demand. And I also did pick a doula who was a part of a lactation consultant agency. So I also got set up with a lactation consultant prior to giving birth. I wasn't like very excited about breastfeeding, but I was like, I might as well try it. I ended up having insufficient glandular tissue. And so I wasn't able to make very much milk, just like anatomically, not to mention probably psychologically from everything that happened with the birth. And then the short time I did breastfeed, I'm pretty sure I had, I don't know how to say it, like is it DMER or D-MER?
Yeah.
Because I had like extreme aversion while I was breastfeeding, like I'm being suffocated, like get away from me. Like it felt like my skin was crawling. It was a very, very like dysregulating experience. So yeah, I like look at all the ways that I did try, you know, I went to the birth class that the guy recommended. I read, you know, I skimmed through what to expect and I read Ina May's book. Mm-hmm. Both were completely unhelpful because neither of them covered anything that happened in my birth either. So it just kind of felt like I tried in the best way I knew how, but everything that I tried just like missed the mark. And then my doula seemed to have good credentials. Like she claimed to have trauma training and stuff. And yet just everything that I know about trauma now, it didn't play out. Like, I don't know. So the lactation consultant was amazing though. So she was great. She ended up being really, really awesome. Even though the breastfeeding didn't really work out very long, but she was super awesome. So yeah, that was my pregnancy. Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Sounds like you prepared as best as you could though, you know, like and a variable birth and all.
Yeah. And it's hard to like, you know, you don't know.
Yeah.
And so there's things that like, yeah, I didn't know, which is part of me coming on here is I just feel like I have so much anger about how little informed consent there is around the different modes of delivery. And
yeah,
you know, I think it depends on the area of the country you're in, but in this area, there is a huge like pro vaginal childbirth, pro unmedicated childbirth, pro breastfeeding, like pro that group. And there was never like a decision given to me. Like you have a decision here on what mode of delivery you want to pick. Mm-hmm. And while I was pregnant, I shared a little bit with my provider. I tried to say, you know, I have a history of trauma, especially around my body. Like I don't really want comments on weight unless you're super concerned about my health. my mom had really, really difficult vaginal deliveries. And I brought that up to him and I said, and very late gestation. And my grandma also had very late gestations. And he said, because I was like, doesn't that make a difference? And he said, no. He's like, it'll be great. You're tall, so it'll be easy, basically. And I was like, okay, like, and I brought up it again a couple times and he just said the same thing. And then I brought up a couple other things, like I've had pretty low blood pressure most of my life. And obviously when I gained weight when I was pregnant, it went up to like kind of a normal range. But I was like, I know the epidural can lower your blood pressure and I'm concerned about that. And he's like, oh, don't worry about it. They just give you medication and that fixes it. I'm like, okay, like you're telling me I shouldn't worry about this. And yeah, so there were just things I tried to bring up and I felt like at any point and I talked to my doula about those things too, and nobody really like engaged them. Like nobody's like, oh, like you have trauma around feeling really out of control around your body. Have you considered introducing some more control to the environment? Like, I think it was just the message that was communicated to me was just the way that you do it is having this really empowering, like feminine power, vaginal birth. And like, that's how you'll heal. And I think I feel frustrated that I did try to communicate all these red flags or like warnings that, hey, this was going to be really difficult with my limited knowledge of childbirth. And they were kind of dismissed, basically, or not taken seriously. And I'm kind of haunted by, what if just one of those people turned around and was like, wait a minute, have you thought about this? Like, did you know you have some choices? Did you know you can have a cesarean section? Did your mom have instruments? Do you know how badly did she tear? Did she have an episiotomy? And I didn't know any of those things. And of course, after I gave birth, I asked her all those things, and she actually withheld a lot of information from me about how her births went. So yeah, my mom was induced at 42 weeks with all 4 children. Wow. She pushed for 4 hours with my older brother, who was the first child, and he did not come out, and she didn't have an epidural or anything. And they basically wheeled her to the OR and they're like, we're going to try instruments before we have to do a C-section as a last case scenario. And they tried vacuum a few times. It didn't work. And then they did forceps. And they gave her an episiotomy and she still tore all the way. She still had a 4th degree tear. And she was stitched up by a resident. And, luckily she doesn't have any fecal incontinence issues to this day, which I will get into, which was not the case for me. But I didn't know any of that. I thought she was able to get the baby out like without assistance. And then the later children, she still had to push for like 3 hours for the other children. None of them came before 42 weeks. And my grandma actually, my mom was the youngest child of 6, and my mom had to be taken out with forceps, and my grandma didn't go into labor until 43 and a half weeks. And so I think that like, I'm really grateful we have a lot of statistics around, okay, after 42 weeks, the rate of stillbirth goes up significantly. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if there's like an Ina's book or I don't know if I'm saying her name right. I could be butchering it. In her book or somewhere else, it was like, there's an estimate, I think 10% of women naturally gestate to like 43 weeks. And so I think I'm probably in that category. And so there really just isn't a lot of space for me in our modern medical system. Like, I don't know. So a lot of red flags. It's not going to go well. And everybody ignored them. So yeah, it's frustrating retelling it because I'm like seeing the train about to derail off the cliff and I just have to like watch it and it's terrible. So
yeah.
Thank you guys.
I talked to another guest about like how she's like trying not to make family history happen. And you're like saying that's family history. Like, here it is. It's right here in front of you. and you guys are just letting it go by because I look like I'm tall. I look like my body's just gonna, like have this baby.
Yeah. And my the other things like my cervical checks, I knew like, okay, there's different data. You don't have to have them. I like did one, but like they were horrific. Like they were so painful. I remember I started crying after the first one. Like I couldn't talk for like a minute afterwards. I was like, if that is just a cervical check, I don't know how labor is going to go. I was like, I've never heard anybody say that they are that painful. So I was immediately like, what is wrong with me? This doesn't feel like a good sign. And the doctor, again, like dismissed it. He kind of actually, he made like kind of a mean joke actually, which should have been a red flag to me. But, and so again, like, why didn't anyone say, hey, maybe you have a hypertonic pelvic floor, which is a huge increased risk for tearing. Maybe you should do some PT. Maybe you have a smaller, like pelvic outlet. Let's think about this for a second.
Yeah.
None of that happened.
There's not a lot of prep, individual prep. It's like there's a class you can take, but then like, I mean, I appreciate the, natural movement and stuff like that, but sometimes like the breast is best campaign, like free birth, all this stuff. It's like, that doesn't work for everybody. And like, we have medical technologies that we're not using. And it's just,
it's hard because, a lot of the stuff that I'm interested with my job around trauma is about, one, how kind of the body keeps the score. But also how, our bodies have a lot of innate wisdom and power. And our intuition is one of our strongest tools that unfortunately trauma kind of mutes that, I guess is the best word, or I'm not sure how to say that. But, and so part of, recovering from trauma is rebuilding our signal with our intuition and trusting it. And so there's this tension that I feel in how my birth ended up, and this, movement of your body knows what to do. And just that idea. Because I do believe that with the trauma work that I do is that like, our bodies have a lot of wisdom, and also, our bodies like don't always do things the way that we hope they do, or that maybe they were meant to function or whatever. Like the world, there's a lot of brokenness in the world. And so I was like thinking about it before I came on here, and I was like, how would it almost feels like I'm straddling this tension and I don't really know what to do with it, because I don't think it's true that like, vaginal birth destroys all women's bodies. Like that's a horrible, there's a lot of patriarchal sexism in that. But I also don't think it's true. Like your body knows what to do. Your body won't make a baby it can't give birth to. Like it's just not true. It's just not always true. And I absolutely think, the United States medical system is not set up in a way to set up an environment that's safe and would facilitate better births. Like I absolutely, I wonder, okay, if things were set up better for me so that I felt safer and supported, maybe things would have gone better. I do think that, but I think it's still been really difficult. I just think physically, anatomically, there's probably just something in my body that would be really, really difficult for me to give birth vaginally. So I'm trying to hold like both of those things as true, I guess. And that, not demonizing one way of giving birth or another, but that just wanting to draw attention to that there are really real long-term quality of life risks in vaginal childbirth that have higher rates of occurrence in cesarean section complications or similar rates of occurrence. And they were never addressed to me. And I don't think that they are often addressed. And especially if, I'm only gonna have one child or two children, which I'm not having any more children because I cannot do that to my body again. maybe an elective cesarean would be a good choice for you, especially if you have a history of trauma, especially, XYZ things. And so that's, I don't know. I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about it. So
Yeah, for sure. I think seeking out, like you said, trauma informed doula and OB or midwife or whatever it is very important. And it's not that prevalent in
yeah.
the birth.
There's a book called When Survivors Give Birth, and I don't know if you guys have heard of it.
I think I might.
Okay.
But
I actually haven't read it. It's on my, of course, nightstand with like 80 other books that I also haven't read. But I think it's directed at like sexual abuse survivors and giving birth. But I think it would probably be a good resource to anybody who has experienced trauma, specifically around like feeling powerless, not having a voice, not having boundaries in relationships, et cetera, because all those things apply. And so, yes, like sexual abuse and sexual trauma are unique and devastating in their impact. There are like broader generalizations that can be applied to any sort of trauma or complex abuse that I think people could benefit from. And so I wish I had read that. And I wish I had read, there's actually a book, and it's most of what I wanted to talk about for just some of the postpartum recovery. But it's called Ever Since I Had My Baby, and it's by a urogynecologist named Roger Goldberg. And I think it's by far like the best book that all women should read when they're pregnant. He basically lays out like the pros and cons of each mode of delivery. And then also like different facets of giving birth, like how long should you, what's the best way to push? How long should you push for? It's like each minute you push over an hour, it's like your risk of pelvic floor damage increases like by a significant percent, for example. Like he uses all these statistics. And then he also talks about the different ways to address like pelvic floor dysfunction that happens after birth. And he is a doctor, so, I think there are some ways that it falls short. Like, he talks about Kegels, which is, I think, modern ways to approach pelvic floor recovery is more about like holistic, like core and pelvic floor relationship and reducing intra-abdominal pressure and stuff like that. So, there's things that fall short, but it was the most like honest and informed discussion of vaginal childbirth versus cesarean section. And he even has a quote. He was like, my goal in this is not to tell you to get one or the other, but is to let you know, like men are counseled on the risks of, when they get like a vasectomy or when they get surgery in that area of their body. And just because it's a naturally occurring pregnancy is a naturally occurring thing doesn't mean you don't also deserve informed consent about what could happen to you. So yeah, I just recommend it.
Yeah. True.
Oh. Yeah. Very good book insight. What was it called one more time?
It's called Ever Since I Had My Baby, and it's like red and yellow, and it was written in 1990, I think, so it's a bit old. But all of the statistics, especially the ones about like severe tearing, are similar to ones that I've read in recent research articles. So I can't imagine it's changed that much.
Yeah. So anything else you want to add before getting into the birth story?
Probably not. Yeah. And I'll try to give more Cliff Notes versions because I know we're almost at an hour. So.
Oh no, you're fine. You don't need to rush.
Yeah, don't rush. Whenever you're ready, we can go into the birth story.
I'm just looking at my notes to be sure. I don't know. I'll try to keep it short. So kind of like I said, my mom went really late, and so I was like, I'm probably going to need to be induced anyways at 42 weeks. So I think, and I'm worried, I'm, 6 feet tall. My husband's like about my size, and then he's pretty like dense. And so I was like, I'm worried about this baby being big too. And because of the weight that I gained, even though I technically didn't have GD, I was like, oh, I feel like this baby's going to be big if we let him go to 42 weeks and then we induce. So, he told me about the Arise study, but I was like, I'd like to let my body at least have a chance. But we scheduled an induction for 41 weeks. Maybe there was no sign of labor till then. I did the Foley induction, so they put it in me, and then I actually went home and had it was just awful contractions for a few hours. And I was like, oh, I'm going to need that epidural because this is terrible. And then, so that dilated me a few centimeters. And then a couple days later, I went up to the induction, the Pitocin induction, and it started, at 8 a.m. or whatever it was. And they slowly ramped it up, and kind of just like everything went wrong in labor, except my daughter was great. So that was great. But everything went wrong aside from like death, And so I remember around like 11 a.m., he was like, do you want me to break your water? And I was like, you're the doctor, so if you're recommending it, sure. So the contractions were fine until then, but they became like, they were horrific, like as soon as the water broke. And like I immediately yelled there was, I think they do fentanyl. There was no gas at the hospital. And so I yelled for that, like while they were getting the epidural. And I was like, I don't care what you do to me, like get this pain to stop. And I was completely gone. Like at that point, no, that's a lie. I think I was still holding out for the epidural. And so I was psychologically still a little bit there. So they came in and did the epidural, and it tanked my blood pressure. And also it didn't work on like half of my body. It didn't work at all on half my body. And the other half, it only like sort of worked. So my blood pressure, I think it was like a little under 90/50. I think it was like 85/45. And they tried to give me the medication to like make it go up, and it like barely went up. So I think it was around like 95/55, just like the rest of the time. And now I hear stories of other women going, oh yeah, they like tried reinserting the epidural, they tried redoing it, and that was never offered to me at any, like, they were just like this is how it is. I was just I can't even talk. Yeah, so I felt a little bit better, but I was basically, I felt really sick, really nauseous, really kind of faint, and it was just that way the rest of the time. It never fixed itself, and then it didn't work on half my body. So at that point, I was like psychologically shut down. I was just kind of gone. And I remember saying, hours went by, the dilation took forever. Understandably, my body was like, this is terrifying. I don't want to, not safe to have a baby right now. And I just felt really helpless, and I felt like I couldn't talk. The only thing I could say was like, I want to die. And I just kept saying that like over and over. And I could tell the nurses were like frustrated with me. They had this like frustrated tone, and they would ask me like, what's wrong? And that was the only thing I could say. Or I even stopped responding to their questions. And I just like kind of laid there. Or I'd like just cry. That was the only thing that I could do. And nobody, like, they never asked for my doctor. Like, my doctor never came and checked on me, the anesthesiologist. I had to ask for them. I was like, I don't even know what my doula was doing. She was like very quiet the entire time. She was like putting shit on my back. But I was like, that's not what I like.
Yeah, that's what
I was clearly
Well, there, like,
yeah, she was there. She was like, trying the tens machine or like trying, like do the sideline with the peanut on between your legs and like trying to get me different positions. And I don't even remember holding things to my forehead because I was, felt faint and stuff, but I didn't need that. I need someone to go, this lady is not here anymore. And this is like a code red and someone needs to get in here and do something about it. And I didn't know that's what I would need because I'm a very assertive person when I'm very with it. But when I'm in collapse mode, I'm not. So yeah, nobody. Yeah, so it was just like that. And I'm just so upset that it didn't occur to anybody like, maybe we should let her know, hey, you have some choices here.
Yeah.
Don't just have to sit here and wait for this to be over.
Right.
And so I think, it's like, wow, if another doctor had come in and just looked at me, gone, this person is not doing well. Like, we can give you a C-section and the baby will be out in an hour. Like, like, I don't know. It's just why didn't anyone, I don't know why anybody just didn't tell me that. They just left me there. So yeah, I don't know, about 11 or 12 was when I started. I wasn't fully dilated until 10 p.m. And then I think it was a little bit before that, I started feeling even warmer. So I was already feeling feverish. I was shaking and nauseous and faint, but it like got worse. And I started developing a uterine infection because, the water, I don't know. Somehow bacteria got up there. And so I had a fever. Then I felt even worse. So I was like, that's great. So yeah, so then I finally was fully dilated and I asked, like, can I push? Because I was like, okay, now I can at least do something. And I had some function in my legs because epidural didn't really work. So, and they were like, yeah, let's push. Turns out that was horrible. That is a horrible idea. Do not purple push. Do not push like you're going to poop. And that's what they all said. It's like, push like you're going to poop. And my doula said that. And it's horrible, horrible for your pelvic floor. And in other countries, they don't. In Australia, I talked to this one lady who had a severe tear, and she was like, they don't even let you purple push for more than an hour because of the amount of damage it does. And I remember pausing and going like, I don't feel like this is the way I should be pushing. Like, this doesn't feel right. Are you guys sure? They're like, no, this is how you're supposed to push. And it's like, all I was doing was catalyzing the damage to my asshole. So do not, obviously if it's an emergency and your doctor's like, you need to get this baby out right now, but like, do not purple push more than, just don't do it. You're supposed to like, push with your, obliques, kind of blow out. It's like you're exhaling and whatever. If you like do a pelvic floor program that is focused on abs and core, they'll like tell you how to do it. Right. But that was very frustrating. And so I basically just purple pushed for like 3 hours and it did nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing happened. While I had an infection.
I think the pelvic floor therapist and the nurses need to get on the same page around here. Like if they're telling us to put we have to poop, but yet it's doing so much more damage. Where is this disconnect?
Yeah. So I don't understand because that's what everyone said. And so technically we actually all poop wrong because we're supposed to like squat. And when you poop, you are actually supposed to like exhale while you're releasing the poop. So technically, if we all poop correctly, we should push in labor like we push like we're going to poop. But we all know none of us like that. And so, very frustrating. But I know, that's right. It's called, I think, the Body Ready method. And then Lauren, I think, Ohayan. But those are, she does a postpartum program called Restore Your Core, but she also contributes to a prenatal program. But they talk about all this stuff. And So it's like, oh my God, why didn't no one tell me that? So don't do that. So yeah, the baby didn't come out. And I was like, okay. So the doctor comes in, and it was a different doctor. It was a different delivering doctor, which I didn't know. And he goes, you know, first time moms can push up to 4 hours. And then at that point you need help getting it out. I was like, no, I need help after an hour, but actually I needed help like after my water broke, but it's fine. And he's like, your choice is either assisted delivery or a C-section. He was on like the other side of the room. Like he came into the room and he was so far away from the bed. It was frustrating. I don't like him. And I was like, what does assisted delivery means? And he was like, well, forceps. And I immediately remember like my stomach sinking because I didn't know anything about forceps. I thought nobody used them anymore. And I was told, oh, people only use vacuum anymore. And turns out he was the literally only doctor in the entire hospital that still used forceps. So not very good luck. And so I felt like in that moment, and people say, oh, C-section is major abdominal surgery. But like what 30-year-old has ever gotten abdominal surgery to where they actually know what that means? Like I was like, I'm an intelligent person. I know generally what surgery involves. But, like I don't actually know. Like when you say major abdominal surgery, that doesn't actually tell you anything unless you've had surgery before and you know the risks. And so just in that moment, I felt so helpless and like, I know nothing here, and nobody prepared me for this moment. And nothing I read prepared me for this moment. And so I'm going to have to trust this guy. And so I asked what the risks of each one were. And then he said C-section is major abdominal surgery, which again tells you nothing. At that point, I was a little bit worried between like my blood pressure and the reaction to the epidural. I was like, I don't know, would I survive a C-section? But I was assuming that. Like I was making a lot of assumptions in my head. But then he said with forceps, he was like, I've been using them a really long time. I'm really good at using them. And then he said, there's like a, small chance of like superficial lacerations to the baby's head. And I mean, you might tear worse, but I've been using them a really long time and I'm really good at them. And so I was like, okay, this has been a living nightmare. So, and I just wanted it to be over. And so I was like, I actually asked everybody to leave the room so I could talk to my husband and my doula alone. Like, what do you guys think? I don't know anything about this. My doula said nothing. She said nothing. She didn't say, here's what I know about forceps. She didn't say, hey, do you want to call someone? Like, do you want to call your parent? Do you want to call? She didn't say anything. And so my husband and I were basically like, this needs to be over. And he said he's really good at using them. So, in my mind, I was like, oh, and everybody tears. So like, why would it be that bad that I might tear worse? Like most people get a secondary tear. And I was like, oh, and they can just repair it. And I have the epidural, so like I won't feel it. So like, why would that be a big deal? And it sounds like there's not a good chance of that happening anyways. And so, he did the forceps, and I think he had good technique because she didn't have any scratches or anything on her. And he actually pulled them out before she crowned. So like I think she was probably like stuck in my pelvis because he kind of like readjusted her head and then I pushed her out. So, she actually ended up having a 99 percentile head. So, so I don't think she was going to come out, without force. And she was 8.5 pounds. So not huge, but not small. And so if I had gone to 42 weeks, probably would have been very big. And I asked him if I tore, and he held up 3 fingers to me. And that was all he talked to me. He didn't tell me anything else the rest of the night. So he held up 3 fingers, and then he repaired it, and then he left the room. And I was like, I know that's not good. Thank you for listening to part 1 of Leigh's story. We'll be back
next episode with part 2. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Golden Hour Birth Podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our discussion and found it insightful and beneficial. Remember, the Golden Hour Birth Podcast is made possible by the support of listeners like you. If you appreciate the content we bring you each week, consider leaving us a review on your favorite podcast platform or sharing the show with your friends and family. Your support helps us reach more people and continue creating valuable episodes. If you have any questions, suggestions, or topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach us on our website, www.goldenhourbirthpodcast, or connect with us on social media. We value your feedback and want to make sure that we're delivering the content you want to hear. Before we sign off, we'd like to express our gratitude to our incredible guests who joined us today. We are honored that they trust us enough to be so open and vulnerable. We're grateful for their time and willingness to share their stories with us. If you're interested in taking the conversation further with us, join us on our Facebook group, The Golden Hour Birth Circle. We'll be back next week with another exciting episode, so be sure to tune in. Until then, stay golden and remember to take care of yourself. We'll catch you on the next episode of the Golden Hour Birth Podcast. Bye!